that you've made for us here. Your foundation has truly lived up to its name as Pathfinders in the matter of Indo-Ocean security. When we started this series of conversations and meetings a little over 5 years ago, I think the situation was much easier in the Indian Ocean region. If you think back to it, so you chose your moment. I'm a bit nervous of what you're going to choose next, but when we look back, and we've just heard both Bernard and the President give us a masterly summary of where we are today in the Indian Ocean region. It's always been a diverse, a plural part of the world. In history, it's also been an ocean of peace, partly because the geography is open. It's not a closed ocean. It's hard for anyone to think that they can control all the choke points. Even Pax Britannica never quite managed all the choke points around the Indian Ocean. And in history, it's been the center of world trade. And in many ways, we have now come back to that old position. We have become so again. We have become central to world trade. Bernard reminded us of how that has happened. But today, it's more complicated, as the President just told us. You consider the most recent headlines. Today, we have threats to the global commons. We have multiple kinds of threats to security through the Indian Ocean region, and security in the broadest sense is at risk here. Consider, for instance, the Houthi attacks on shipping in the Red Sea and the resumption of piracy off the Somali coast. By some accounts, this has led to the rerouting of about 90% of container ships that would normally use the Red Sea route. In more normal times, the Red Sea accounted for about 1/3 of all global container traffic and 40% of all trade between Asia and Europe. And container prices on some routes have tripled or even quadrupled. But there are also larger issues that should concern us, and I'm glad that our agenda for today and tomorrow includes this. These include challenges to international law, as expressed in UNCLOS, which we all negotiated with such difficulty. And several countries now feel that their sovereignty, their independence is under threat. Transnational, non-traditional threats are actually enhanced by a host of illegal activities now, enabled by technology in ways that we couldn't think of earlier. And on top of that, you have the effects of climate change on the ocean, on livelihoods, not just of fishermen, and natural disasters. So what really makes these more dangerous and harder to solve is two things. One, it's the overlay of geopolitics and great power rivalry that they've now acquired. In effect, negotiating and making concessions necessary to peaceful solutions has become much more difficult, partly because of great power rivalry, but also because we've seen the rise to power in many significant countries of new authoritarian leaders who base their legitimacy on nationalism or ultranationalism. This makes compromise, give and take, much harder for them. We are now in a world that I like to say is between orders. This is not a settled world where the order is established. And in fact, you have a world where all the great powers are dissatisfied or are revisionist, really, in traditional terms. When somebody says, "Make America great again" or "Build back better," you're expressing dissatisfaction with the present. That's a revisionist sentiment. And this goes across the board, whether it's a China dream or whoever you talk to. This, for me, is worrying. And in the absence of an accepted international order, several powers see or think they see opportunity. Russia in the Ukraine, Hamas in Gaza, Israel in Gaza, Hamas in Israel. The list is long, and it's getting longer if you look at it today. So this works both ways, great power rivalry. On the one hand, you see many more initiatives by middle and other powers to try and assert themselves, assert their interests. On the other hand, it creates balancing opportunities for middle powers and the others to play the great powers against each other. And in more settled orders, those kinds of balancing opportunities not available. Admiral heading Indo-PACOM is in Nepal this week, a landlocked country. What does that tell you? So what should we do about this? I mean, I wish I knew, because I wish I had an answer for you. Because I don't think you can depend on the UN, the multilateral system anymore. Not for any fault of the UN or the multilateral system, but the whole multilateral system is based on member states as the constituent units. Now, if those member states are quarreling among themselves, how do you expect the system to work? And it's unfair to blame the system or to expect it to deliver effectively. So that's why when I say this is an era between orders of great power rivalry, it makes the multilateral system ineffective. So what we have instead is, instead of old-style multilateralism, is a set of plurilateral arrangements, different ones. I mean, and there's been an explosion of them. I mean, the Quad is the one that gets a lot of attention, but if you actually think of it, what Sri Lanka did in the Colombo Security Dive, for instance, was a creative and approach that is worth looking at and maybe emulating in other geographies. But there's a whole host earlier, and they all need to be made more effective, but they're all partial. They all address bits of the problem, and they don't address the general threats to the global commons that I mentioned at the beginning. There are also, of course, ad hoc measures taken by some members of the active, such as Operation Prosperity Guardian in the Red Sea, which the President mentioned, which obviously demonstrates how important this ocean is to global interests. In that operation is local, bordering the Red Sea, Bahrain. That tells you that it tells you the lack of a local order, I suppose, or else possibly even of limited local interest. And India has undertaken you have people here from a wide range of countries, all of whom share a strong interest in the peace and security of the sea lanes that we depend on in the Indian Ocean. So I wish you every success in your deliberations, and I'm confident that, like its two predecessors, this conference too will be productive, meaningful, and very successful. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. May I now call upon Her Excellency Julie Chang, Ambassador of the United States of America.
Thank you. Good morning, friends, Excellencies, Deputy Director General Makoto, my fellow diplomatic colleagues. It's a privilege and an honor to be here at the opening of this third Indian Ocean Conference. A special thanks to the Pathfinder Foundation and co-chair Ambassadors Gunitilake and Menon for their continued leadership for fostering this ongoing constructive dialogue on peace and security, and a special thanks to Ambassador Melinda Moragota. Now, before I start, I just wanted to throw out one challenge to Pathfinder. As I looked at the agenda of all the moderators and speakers, I noticed that I'm the only woman speaker of about a dozen or more. And I'm sure there are dozens, hundreds of women experts in the international security field who would be flattered if invited to speak at this event next year. So I throw out that challenge to a Pathfinder for a more diverse panel of a set of gender diverse and other diverse representatives at this important conference. Now, I had the pleasure of speaking at the second iteration of this very conference back in March of 2022, not long after I first arrived in Sri Lanka. It was actually my very first public speech here. At that time, I said our vision for the Indo-Pacific recognizes that much of the planet's future will be based on what happens in this region. Be a battleground, it suggests a very passive role, letting yourself be a battleground. Instead of that, Sri Lanka can assert its identity, its sovereignty, and take a hold and shape its own future destiny and the future of this region. I think that's the right question we all should be asking ourselves today. Now, 2 years ago, it was then that the United States launched its Indo-Pacific strategy, which focuses on promoting a free and open Indo-Pacific that is connected, prosperous, secure, and resilient. The IPS seeks to galvanize bilateral and multilateral relationships across the Indo-Pacific region. For Sri Lanka, that means, of course, focusing on its immediate Indian Ocean neighbors and environs. But why limit yourself there? Think big. It means building or expanding connections within and beyond the Indian Ocean region, and to see how it can help facilitate linkages and relationships with distant partners as well. It's not asking, how does Sri Lanka fit into the Indo-Pacific, but how do you grasp all the opportunities that are here to be offered and act as a leader? As we know, oceans see no borders, and it only makes sense for Sri Lanka to broaden its strategic influence to encompass both the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Oceans. That's going to be the core of my talk today. We want to recognize some of these Indo-Pacific linkages already that are in existence for Sri Lanka. I recently helped launch a U.S. government-funded ports capacity building program by the Colombo Plan. It not only sends experts to study ports in the United States, but helps build cybersecurity capabilities and give Sri Lanka's Ports Authority the know-how and technical expertise to innovate port operations and expose SLPA staff to the latest international standards and best practices. Just this week, we are hosting a cybersecurity workshop in Colombo that will build upon these efforts. And it's to secure the infrastructure and the various sources of national security from cyber and ransomware attacks, so critical to all of our national securities. Now, the Colombo Plan, founded and headquartered here in Colombo, is a decades-old development platform with member states from across East Asia, South Asia, and the Middle East, and as far as west as the United States and Chile. In addition, Sri Lanka is now the current chair of the IORA, the Indian Ocean Rim Association, and IORA is the only diplomatic ministerial level platform in the Indian Ocean region and includes a dialogue partners including from Europe and East Asia. As the sitting chair, Sri Lanka is in a position to drive inter-regional cooperation on economic development and political dialogue for the next 2 years. So needless to say, Sri Lanka is already playing that outsized role in helping to shape global policy. And acknowledging the value of being a part of the larger global community, Sri Lanka is currently pursuing a membership in the RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. This is something the President has said many times. This move matters to Sri Lanka because it would enhance economic ties and make it easier to trade goods and services with RCEP's Asia-Pacific member countries. But more importantly, by doing this, Sri Lanka strengthens its role as a bridge between nations in the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean regions. And the U.S. sees this as a win-win for economic growth and regional stability. You've also gathered here today to discuss Indian Ocean security. The U.S. continues to play an active role in strengthening Sri Lanka's capacity to protect its territorial waters. We have donated 3 former U.S. Coast Guard cutters to Sri Lanka's Navy and have provided a variety of other security assistance. And just last Friday, Deputy Secretary of State Richard Verma was here. He announced a planned donation of a 4th Coast Guard cutter to the Sri Lankan Navy. And this demonstrates our continued commitment to bolster Sri Lanka's own capacity to advance freedom of navigation by addressing key maritime challenges including piracy, human smuggling, human trafficking, drug smuggling, and illegal, unreported, unregulated fishing. We recently witnessed Sri Lanka addressing global challenges head-on and broadening its role on the world stage by sending one of those donated cutters to support Operation Prosperity Guardian that the President mentioned. The Sri Lankan Navy joined a multinational coalition of naval vessels in the Red Sea, Gulf of Aden, and the Arabian Sea from over a dozen countries to help safeguard the freedom of navigation and protect the busy sea lanes of commercial ship traffic from Houthi attacks. This is a clear demonstration of Sri Lanka playing an active role in helping to secure the global supply chain that benefits both Sri Lanka but also the economies of the world. Thanking Sri Lanka for this leadership was an important message conveyed during the recent visit of the Deputy Secretary and others. Another aspect of the IPS is to promote resiliency to 21st century transnational threats, which includes disruptions to global supply chains. Sri Lanka plays a vital role in facilitating the steady flow of goods as it hosts the only transshipment hub in South Asia. As you know, these supply chains represent the commercial lifelines for economies across the region and around the world. Not only is Sri Lanka contributing to the protection of those lifelines, but the Port of Colombo is facilitating that supply chain resilience by providing the storage and logistical movement of that essential cargo. And that's why the U.S. government, through our $553 million in financing from the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, is helping to further expand the Port of Colombo's capacity by nearly 50% through the construction of the West Container Terminal. This Sri Lankan-Indian joint venture project will enhance Sri Lanka's status on the world stage as the home of a vital transshipment hub essential to the flow of global trade. And finally, in addressing the different forms of transnational threats, the strategy focuses on, quote, the Indo-Pacific as the epicenter of the climate crisis, but as essential to the climate crisis solutions, unquote. While the impacts of climate change know no boundaries, Sri Lanka and the rest of the island nations across the Indo-Pacific are disproportionately threatened by rising sea levels, increasing water temperatures, depleting fish populations, eroding coastlines, and erratic weather patterns. Sri Lanka and its fellow island states are fighting a common cause and must join forces to face these climate-related challenges together. The U.S. is committed to supporting countries across the Indo-Pacific in protecting the environment, reducing emissions, and accelerating the clean energy. So let me conclude by quoting President Biden on the IPS. He said, quote, the future of each of our nations, and indeed the world, depends on a free and open Indo-Pacific, enduring and flourishing in the decades ahead, unquote. It's clear to me that Sri Lanka is positioned to seize a leading role, not to play a passive role and let itself become a battleground. And as I had hoped 2 years ago at this conference, when I said that Sri Lanka would become an emerging leading role, have that emerging leading role in this region, and even expand upon it across the greater Indo-Pacific, I can assure you the United States stands in support of this island nation as it looks beyond the horizon of the Indian Ocean and forges greater ties in collaboration with the rest of the world. Thank you.
His Excellency Hayashi Makoto.
Good morning, everyone. Ambassador Gunatilaka, Ambassador Menon, and U.S. Ambassador Julie Chan, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very honored to participate in this Indian Ocean Security Conference organized by the Pathfinder Foundation. I would also like to express my gratitude to the Pathfinder Foundation and all those involved for making today's third conference happen. Ladies and gentlemen, the recent spread of COVID-19, the crisis in Ukraine, and Houthis attacks on ships in the Red Sea have exposed the vulnerability of the global supply chain. The Indian Ocean has long been an important trade route and source of economic development for Asia, the Pacific, the Middle East, Africa, and Europe. But in recent years, the international community has become increasingly divided and confrontational, and the Indian Ocean region is no exception. The Indian Ocean must be a place where diverse nations can coexist and prosper together under the rule of law. With this in mind, Japan is promoting free and open Indo-Pacific, we call FOIP, as a common vision to guide the international community, including the Indo-Pacific region, toward cooperation. Today, I would like to introduce the basic concept of FOIP and Japan's latest initiative. Japan has long emphasized the importance of the idea that Indian and Pacific Oceans should be seen as a whole, and that those oceans should be free and open. As the then Prime Minister Abe addressed the Indian Parliament in 2007 on the Conference of the Two Seas on the Indian and Pacific Oceans. Bringing these ideas to fruition, a free and open Indo-Pacific was announced in 2016 with its basic principles of defending freedom and the rule of law, finding universality in diverse values, and promoting cooperation through dialogue. Japan's new national security strategy, formulated in December 2022, also places diplomacy under this FOIP vision as a top priority. In practical terms, this strategy represents a major shift in Japan's post-war security policy, and free and open in the Pacific can be seen at the core of this strategy. In March 2023, Prime Minister Kishida introduced a new plan for FOIP during his visit to India. Based on the basic principle of the free and open in the Pacific, the new plan set out 4 new pillars of cooperation. First, principles for peace and rules for prosperity. Second, addressing challenges in an Indo-Pacific way. Third, multi-layered connectivity. And fourth, expanding efforts for security and safe use from sea to air. In order to implement the new plan, Prime Minister Kishida announced to mobilize more than $75 billion in public and private funds in the Indo-Pacific region by 2030. The fourth pillar of the new plan, which is security and safe use from sea to air, will be of particular interest to today's participants. It aims to ensure the security and stability of the high seas as a whole, linking the security and stable use of the skies with the sea route that are the focus of free and open in the Pacific. Ladies and gentlemen, taking this opportunity, I would like to underscore the importance of the 3 principles of rule of law at sea, namely making and clarifying claims based on international law, not using force or coercion in trying to drive their claims, and seeking to settle dispute by peaceful means. Law exists to protect the vulnerable, and the rule of law at sea protects the sea from the geopolitical risk. Last year, based on these three principles, the Japanese government formally adopted the position that it is permissible to preserve the existing baselines and maritime zones established in accordance with UNCLOS, notwithstanding the regression of coastlines due to sea level rise caused by climate change. With a view to protecting the freedom of the seas, various projects are also being provided to strengthen countries' maritime law enforcement capacity through human resource development, enhanced cooperation between maritime security agencies, and joint training with national coast guards. In addition, in order to protect the sea lanes that are the arteries of logistics, Japan has been making efforts, including support for capacity building to combat IUU, illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, support for strengthening the maritime law enforcement capacity of coastal states, support for management of maritime zone of jurisdiction, and the development of electronic nautical chart. In light of expanding its effort for security cooperation, my government develops legal infrastructure with countries in the Indo-Pacific region. Most notably, in April 2023, the government established a new framework of grant assistance, Official Security Assistance, OSA. This is a cooperation program that targets the armed forces and other related organizations of friendly countries as beneficiaries and provides materials and equipment as well as assistance for infrastructure development. In the first year of the OSA, Japan has signed the exchange of notes with the Philippines, Malaysia, Bangladesh, and Fiji for the provision of the coastal surveillance radar systems and rescue and security vessels to help maintain and strengthen maritime security in Indo-Pacific region. At the same time as promoting such efforts, countries must also work together to address the growing risk of marine pollution due to increased economic activities in the oceans. In this context, in order to upgrade maritime disaster management, Japan has provided assistance to the Sri Lankan Coast Guard, contributing to the improvement of its oil spill response capability. Japan will continue to actively promote multifaceted effort to realize the free and open Indo-Pacific, including the development of an industrial value chain connecting the Bay of Bengal with northeastern region of India, which aims to improve organic connectivity across the Bay of Bengal region, as well as the debt restructuring process of Sri Lanka, where Japan co-chaired a meeting of creditors countries with India and France as a part of efforts toward transparent and comparable development finances. Finally, as we have often stated, let me reiterate, a free and open Indo-Pacific is not against any particular idea or country, but is open and inclusive. Under this free and open Indo-Pacific philosophy, we intend to further strengthen our cooperation with the countries of the Indo-Pacific region by promoting concrete cooperation through new plan to overcome the various challenges facing the international community. I hope that today's meeting will be vibrant and will contribute to the stable development of the Indian Ocean in the future. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Your Excellency Hayashi Makoto. May I please call everyone outside for a group photograph and refreshments now, prior to commencing session 1. The photograph will be taken on the atrium, the lobby up there.